Thank you. It's by my watch about 1700, and we're going to bring it home. All right? I want to start by telling you how honored and excited I am to be here today and to have been invited to participate with you. I'm honored because each of you is a leader, and each of you is a leader in your community and in the future of your community. And I'm excited by the enthusiasm I see, the creativity, and just this last discussion we had with Jerry reinforced all of that. So thank you for having me here today. My topic is our role as the networked individual. And when thinking about this topic, I thought, first of all, wow, that is a very big, meaty, complicated topic. But it's right on. And the other thing that excites me about being here is each of you has it right, because what you've been exploring today is the issue of leadership. So you know you are leaders, but how does one lead in this new world and this new life? And I can guarantee you this, it's going to be very different and needs to be different than it ever has been in the past. And you're right on the edge of that. All right, so the brief. Now what I did was I looked at the brief specific to network individuals, and I wanted to glean what I thought were the key topics within that and organize myself around that. And I found 4. The first I saw to be the issue of self-determination. Are we the tail of the dog? How do we determine our future? Is it going to be different than it has been in the past? But the whole issue of how we determine ourselves. The second was the issue of collective intelligence and ideas. And this is a very big idea, and we saw that run through the course of today. But I saw that being the second kind of concentration of issues and topics. And then the third was the issue of interpersonal engagement. So in this world of accelerated connections, and in this world of possibilities, and in this world in which Jerry can ask you to tweet, and begin your life mission, where is the role of interpersonal engagement, the intimacy that we want to have with our friends and family, coupled with the connections that we can have with thousands of people at the same time? And is there a risk of losing that in today's world? And then lastly, and most important, the issue of leadership. So how do we do this? And as I said, what I do know is it's not going to be as it once was. And I'm excited by the fact that you're exploring how it needs to be in a new and different world. So with those 4 topics, what I decided to do was somewhat arbitrarily aggregate the issues of collective intelligence and engagement into leadership. Because I have a rule of 3s, which we'll get to, which is never overcomplicate things beyond 3 items. Once you explain number 4, people have forgotten what number 1 is. And I think there's a natural collection around the idea of leadership that if you exercise leadership properly, you de facto are engaged in self-determination, are you not? And you're going to do that by harnessing the power of collective intelligence and ideas. So bingo, there you go, leadership. And then the separate dynamic of interpersonal engagement, because I think that's something very separate and important. And by the way, I think very contradictory when we get into that. Now, the other thing I added was, since business is in the name of this forum, I added business. So we're going to talk about a business topic. So there you have it. That's the agenda for today. The role of networked individuals as to business, as to interpersonal engagement, and then as to leadership. Now then, because I have another principle, which is everything we embark on should have an element of fun and joy, I have a little video for you. And I also think it conveniently arcs across those 3 things of business, interpersonal relationships, and leadership. Are you familiar with an organization called Playing for Change? Anyone? Okay. Well, it's a group of people who thought that there was a way to promote peace throughout the world in a way that expressed it through interactivity in a way that only the internet can do. So they took leadership, they took action, they created a business, a not-for-profit. and then exemplified it through what I'm going to show you. So 3 minutes. It's lovely, huh? So I suspect the tweet that went out was, I want to do something with music to better the world. And they've done it. So I think it's a terrific example of the role of the networked individual and how that can impact, so many lives in so many ways. Now, I love that as a metaphor. But when I was watching that, I had a day job, and I was in retail. And so I want to offer some observations about how the network and collective intelligence and transparency, which is an issue that came up many times today, can play out in the world of retail. And I'm going to use an example that shows that the combination of collective intelligence that creates transparency is a prime driver in the ability to improve quality and lower costs. And I'm going to give you a real-time example of how that's playing out right now in the US. So in the world as it once was, information was largely held by the providers. So the brands would tell you what they wanted to tell you about whatever product they were trying to sell. It would show up in retail. You'd go into the retail shop, And the salesperson would tell you what he or she wanted you to know about it, and they'd price it in the manner that they wanted to, knowing that it was unlikely you were able to do very much about comparative shopping or comparative quality shopping, right? So who was in charge? The brand was in charge, followed by retail, and you were the tail of the dog. So what's happened with collective intelligence is you are now in charge. And with that, retailers are having to respond and act in the way that you're dictating how you want to purchase things. And then the brands are having to responding in the same way. So here's an example. There's a company in the US called Best Buy. And Best Buy is probably best described as a monster. They're an absolute behemoth. They have 40% of the total share of electronic sales in the US, a $50 billion company. Since 1995, they've doubled their revenue every 5 years. They're just massive, right? And something's happened to them. And something happened to them about 5 years ago. And they're having a real problem with it. And remember the conversation earlier when Guy said life is chaos? Well, it's chaotic for them. It's less chaotic, by the way, for those that are competing with them because they've figured something out and they're creating chaos for Best Buy. So what happened is a combination of two things. There's a platform called CNET. Is anyone familiar with that? CNET? And what CNET does, across all of these products you can see, phones, televisions, anything that's electronic, aggregates information and aggregates it from unbiased experts and consumer opinions. So you can go in and let's say you're thinking about a 51-inch LED TV and you don't know which one to decide on or a camera, SLR camera. You go in and it gives you all of the ratings that are applied across that product so you can very quickly make a discrimination across, I want that one, I don't want that one, right? So you've kind of narrowed the search. Now, CNET's been around a while. And by the way, these practices are new to the consumer business. They've been in the commodity business for years. And what these people have done is applied this to the consumer business. Now, about 4 or 5 years ago with the advent of smartphones, apps showed up. And there are two of them. There's one called the Find. And with the Find, anyone familiar with these kind of apps? Well, with the Find, you go into any store, and let's say, again, you're looking at that TV. You take the phone over, and you just take a snapshot of the SKU, the barcode on that TV that distinguishes that specific model, and it instantly tells you what the price is down the street, online, so you immediately have pricing negotiation power. And so what's happening is that customers are walking into Best Buy, and they've been doing this for the last 4 to 5 years. They're carrying their smartphones. They know they want the Sony. They're not going to be sold on the Panasonic. They walk up and they flash this camera, and the salesperson says, well, it's, pick a number, $1,200. He says, well, not really. It's $1,000 down the street, and it's $900 on Amazon. Because Amazon has it invested in the brick and mortar. They don't have that investment. So they've stripped out that cost and they passed it on to who? To you. So now Best Buy has a dilemma. Do they match the price? What do they do? The first thing they did was wrong-headed in the world of transparency. They made their online prices less than their brick and mortar prices. So what do you think happened to people that bought a TV at the shop, went home and found out it was cheaper online? They were not happy, right? So where's the power shifted and what has happened? You now are in charge, right? And so you have a choice, and many of them did, to go to Amazon. And here's what happened. So this shows the chart of sales for Amazon. And you can see the kind of growth they've had from 10 billion, sorry, those zeros, you know, used to work in the government, 50 billion. Smartphones show up. They flatline. That's a medical term for problems. They flatline. Look what's happening to Amazon. Okay, so that's what happened. And so if you're the consumer, the collective intelligence plus the transparency, you know how Best Buy has responded to this? 1, price guarantee. That's good for you. Price is lower. 2, they're increasing their staff on the floor and training them to be better sales advisors. Quality up, price down. Collective intelligence plus transparency. All right? Lesson 1. Don't forget it because your customers won't. Okay. On to the topic of interpersonal engagement. And this is one when I started to look at it. Everyone has an opinion about these kind of things. But I found it to be a world of 2 very contradictory dynamics. And I don't know how prevalent it is in Argentina. But there's a lot of angst and anxiety in the States about kids texting. I mean, they're walking into walls. They're driving and texting. That's all they do, right? And they're not talking to each other. And so what is that? And how do we deal with that? So I looked at some of the stats and found some very interesting things. That if you think about the universe of the social media, so the capo di tutti capi of social media is Facebook. They have a staggering 1 billion users. 1 billion users, astounding. Now, however, within the 1 billion, let me back up. I read the future slide. Okay. This is a scene in Kansas, which is a rural state. And in Kansas, people had small relationships. Not small relationships, small in number, large in complexity. But they would deal with, 4 to 5 people, 6 people in their neighborhood, in their community. But kids today have relationships across the world, absolutely global. And Facebook is the biggest example of that. So 1 billion users. However, amongst those billion users, on average, a Facebook user has 120 friends. And even more interesting, amongst those 120, the exchanges are across 4 to 6 people. So it's actually a very intimate conversation that's had amongst Facebook users. Now, there's some interesting parallels. In the world of instant messaging and text, about 120 people on a buddy list, about the same number. But they chat to 3 to 4 people, right? So it's a very close group of people. Mobile phones, 80% of the calls are made to 4 people. So a very similar circumstance. And Skype, 80% of the activity to Skype is with 2 people. So there's no doubt that it's created this terrific intimacy across a very much smaller group than I think people think about. There's not as much use and relevance for it in the larger group. Now, personally, I can tell you Skype has just been a terrific tool for us. It's a tool of ubiquity and intimacy. This happens to be members of our family conversing with our daughter in Thailand. So on the left, it's my brother-in-law and his 2 nieces hijinking before Kate, our daughter. And on the right, over the holiday, the same thing. In the lower right-hand corner, you can see just a little bit of this same MacBook Pro in which Katie is talking to us. So the ability to do that is just staggering. And the ability to sustain that kind of intimacy and connection with the people that you love and people that matter with you. Another little side story on that, I read a story about a family in New York City that was going to have an important family event. And the grandmother lived in France and was ill and could not make it. So you know what they did is they went to a toy store and they got a little robot that you could move around. They put an iPad on the top of the robot, an address on the robot, and they clicked her in through Skype. So she walked around the party with her head on the iPad, dressed up, and conversed with people throughout the evening. So it was a virtual connect that's unprecedented. But so with that, the other contradiction to this side is this phenomenon which Cheryl Turkle describes as connection to isolation. Now, Cheryl Turkle is a behavioral scientist, and she has spent 20 to 25 years studying this whole phenomenon of the impact on technology with people. And what she has found is that there's been And she might seem to many to be a bit alarmist in the way she describes this. But with the proliferation of the devices, particularly the handheld pocket devices, it's changed not only the way that we behave, but who we are. And in her estimation, there's a profound, perhaps meaningful psychological consequence of the way that this can induce connections rather than conversations. So specifically, if you think about the proliferation of these things, and I was impressed that most of you had them turned off this afternoon, but people are different now. I mean, in this top picture, it's not uncommon now in business meetings for people to, give you your attention when they think you deserve it. In the meantime, they're doing whatever they're doing, right? And that would be unheard of just in terms of protocol and proper behavior 5, 6, 7 years ago. Parents, and kids, and this phenomenon of being together but alone at the same time. So what's happening here, and why is this happening? Well, you might ask yourself, hey, all of these things have got to add up to a conversation, right? All these little discrete messages, well, they don't. Now, it's interesting, I think, this is a personal judgment, that these things are very effective when used with that same universe of people that you're talking to on Facebook and, the 2 to 4 people with whom you're very intimate, because you can say, I love you. And it means something. How you doing? Did it work? Good, whatever it is. Because you speak in code to the people that you love and are very close to you. But when you contract this into a series of discrete messages as the way to converse, it doesn't work. And so what's happening here is that conversation has devolved to connection, which is creating a sense of isolation. And there are a couple of important phenomena going on that I think are behind that, which is connecting and tweeting creates the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship in many cases. Now, what does friendship require, first and foremost? You have to be open. You have to be vulnerable, right? And if you're going to converse with someone, you have to engage and you have to be ready to listen. Not everyone likes to do that, and it's a busy world. So if you have a surrogate, which is texting, you can say, hey, I got 120 friends, right? I'm fine. But in fact, it just doesn't feel right? Because you don't always have that same kind of connection. And it also creates this feeling in the sense that being alone is a problem. Being alone is a problem to be solved. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't tell you how many times I'm driving around and I get to the red light, it's like, oh, okay, anything going on? You're almost fed with this need to be, perpetually connected. So, but that principle, that being alone, not being connected, not being tethered, it's 11 o'clock, is wrong. Because what it does is it takes away from us the need for solitude. And why is solitude important? Well, without solitude, Jerry wouldn't have done what he had done. Because solitude creates self-reflection. And with self-reflection, you then have the confidence to engage with others. Because it's how you learn about yourself. And if you deprive yourself of solitude, you don't gain the advantage of self-reflection. So what's the answer to that? Well, this is, what is the term? Abuela? Grandfather? Abuelo? Abuelo. The abuelo says, it starts by being open, taking risks and being vulnerable. It follows by listening, and it follows by seeking solitude. So seeking solitude, if you're a parent, you want to find solitude within your life and with your family. So you have to find time when it's quiet and you can talk, right? So those 3 things I think are very important. And then converse. Now, you guys are all different because you do a lot of conversing. And your conversing is about important stuff. But I think you're the exception. And don't define yourself necessarily by those amongst you. There are others that aren't doing this. And it's a lost art. We have to do it. We have to converse. Interpersonal engagement. Okay, so with that, and I think this is going to be to ramp up, as they say, or ladder up to the most important issue here, which is leadership. And as you may recall, I somewhat arbitrarily organized leadership within these other two realms of collective intelligence and ideas and interpersonal relationships. And I want to add one more, which was, I think, implied in everything that we talked about today is, where's the moral compass? Because what we do know about the network is it's huge, it's going to be hard to control, and Admiral Pico talked about it today. If you think about leadership, there are kind of two ends of the spectrum, and he was talking about that this morning. One is dictatorship, totally controlled. The other is anarchy, right? And you know, that's where evil resides, in those two. Not unilaterally, but you know, it's more prone to be nurtured there. So we have to find a balance in between that allows us the moral compass, because the responsibility of leadership is to have that moral compass. And frankly, I don't know how to do it. That was the thing that when I started thinking about this this idea of our role as a network individual is, how do we find the moral compass if we're going to open everything up? Who's going to tell us? How are we going to find it? So I found a source to help with that. And we're going to start with a reference point, which is, in many respects, there have been three big things. I love threes. There have been three big things that have occurred to us in our most recent history, our modern history. The agrarian age was a tough place to be. Guy was talking about the luck of where you're born in geography. If you were born as a serf, you weren't lucky, because you had very little prospects. Everything was restrained and held from you. Wealth was centrally controlled. Knowledge was centrally controlled. And if you think about it, if you were a serf, you were born, you worked, and you died. And not a lot happened in between. You didn't go anywhere, right? And you didn't have prospects for advancement. Then suddenly Gutenberg developed the printing press, and it changed everything. Because then knowledge could be transferred. Knowledge could be accessed. And then everyone had access to those things. And knowledge is power. So it created the ability for ideas to move across different commercial regions and areas. And so everything changed, and from it came the industrial age. And the industrial age brought to many prosperity and wealth. It wasn't universally good, nothing is, but it changed the lives of many. And we're in that same transition now with the analog, from the printing press to the internet, but we don't know how to govern it. And I'd suggest that much of our models in terms of institutions and management are more about the industrial age than they are about the networked age. Excuse me. So yesterday, at the onset of the internet, it was largely a presentation of content. This actually comes out of the brief. I'm not sure. I want to meet the person who wrote that brief, by the way. That was terrific. I mean, it was passionate, it was thoughtful, comprehensive. But the internet initially pushed information, right? Now it takes information, and it's a global computer. Every second, with all of the input, things change. And we have access to that whole resource of collective intelligence and ideas. Now, part of this world is exemplified by what's called a burning platform. So a burning platform is an expression that's used oftentimes, at least in my professional career, that is a point at which you realize that where you are has greater risk than where you're going to do that has risk, inherent risk. So if you're on this oil platform, you don't have a big interest in jumping into the water until the thing catches on fire. And that realization that things have to change, that burning platform, I think is ever present. I think certainly this visual metaphor in terms of what's going on with the environment, we have a burning platform. And I think the thing that we've seen with the global crisis, with the failure of institutions and leadership, we have a burning platform. So we have to change the way that we lead and the way that we hold ourselves collectively accountable. So back to TED. There's a fellow named Don Tapscott, and he's a strategist and a futurist. And he has an approach to the way that one can lead and one can manage as it can be the internet and the network world we live in. And he calls this thing the 4 principles of openness. And openness. Now, open, that's a nice word. Open door policy, open-minded, open bar. And he has these 4 principles, which are all about the principle of being open and openness. The first is collaboration. And as an example, he uses this fellow named Rob McEwen. Rob McEwen was a banker. And he was a banker who became a gold miner. Not sure how that happened, but he became a gold miner. And he was, just by chance, Don Tapscott's neighbor. So he's a gold miner, but he's got a problem. He can't find the gold. And so he goes to his geologists, and they go, well, we're not sure where it is ourselves. And so the science of geology was quite imperfect. So here he's got a problem. He's not a gold miner. He's a banker, but he's running a gold mine. So he has an idea. So he puts on the internet a worldwide contest. He shares all of the data they have, the geological data, and he offers a $500,000 prize for someone to tell him where the gold is, right? Well, guess what? He got a lot of responses. And one of them told him where the gold was. And the value of his company went from $9 billion to $90 billion because they could find the gold. Now, interestingly, it was not a geologist who found the gold. It was a computer scientist who showed him a way of taking the data and organizing it in a 3D representation of it, which allowed them to be more precise in how they found the gold. So collaboration is principle in lesson 1. The second is transparency. And Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. One's evil, one's good. Which one? Wikipedia? And WikiLeaks was just the tip of the iceberg. But you can no longer hide from whatever it is that you're doing that's wrong, whether it's the way you price at retail. And it's a problem for the fat cats and tycoons. Because if you're naked, you better start buffing up, right? And by buffing up, you need to create an organization that has values, because it matters. So I'll give you 2 examples of that. Apple, terrific values. And they have values around how they excel in what they do. They have values around how they concentrate on what they do for your fun and your engagement, right? And it's kind of nice relative to Microsoft, because Microsoft is all about work. Excel spreadsheets, adding things up, subtracting things. You know, who needs that? Yeah, someone. But the ability to, do videos and so on. And Tom's Shoes. I don't know if you know Tom's Shoes. Tom's Shoes has been around for 8 or 10 years, but he had a very simple idea. Anytime you buy a pair of shoes from Tom, he gives a pair of shoes to a kid somewhere. And he gives a pair of shoes in Africa, Asia, Central America. So, and they create great shoes. They're very fashionable. So both these companies have values, and it's distinguishing them, and it's made them different, and it's made them prosperous. Now, as a little side comment on this, Apple's got a problem now too, because they have been found out to have questionable labor practices in China, right? And in this transparent world, they had to change that. Now, 10 years ago, maybe not, right? So in today's world, if you're transparent, you have to have values. You have to be buff. Okay, the third is sharing. And the pioneer in this was IBM, who was struggling in their business, their supercomputer business, and primarily their supercomputer business. And they had what was valued at about $400 million worth of intellectual property. And we know what they decided to do? They gave it away. They gave it away to an open platform called Linux. And what happened was all of those that had that access to it, much like the people searching for the gold, improved upon what they had. And that system ran on their supercomputers. And so they made billions by sharing what conventionally would have been held very close to the vest. And it was a radical change at the time. And Gilbert talked about that today, right? the open platform that they're developing. I think it's called Qatari, and the kind of value that that can bring. I think this is a very gnarly one because the whole issue of intellectual property is fraught with risk. But I'll give you an example of where this could work again in the pharmaceutical company. The pharmaceutical companies are about to have a big event that they're not looking forward to. About 80%, 70, 80% of their patents are going to expire within the next 5 to 6 years. Maybe they should think about an open platform, right? Okay, the fourth and the most powerful is empowerment itself. And all of these things ladder up to empowerment. So the ability to collaborate, the need to be transparent, and sharing create empowerment. And if you think about empowerment's done, all you have to do is think about the Arab Spring. You know, the Arab Spring in Tunisia, you know how that started? It was one fruit vendor. It was a guy. He was 17, 18 years old. He was poor. And he thought, I'm only going to be a fruit vendor the rest of my life. And he had a beef with a local police person who was harassing him about his selling certificate, his license, for his cart. And he set himself on fire. And that was the match. And that led to the revolt in Tunisia, which led to the revolt in Libya, which led to the revolt in Egypt. And that would not have happened with the kind of empowerment that people have now to that kind of knowledge. And I'll tell you what, Assad is not going to last. He's not going to last. He's not going to last because the world's not going to let him have it, right? And that kind of empowerment doesn't do away with the kind of trauma and the kind of problems and death that occurred, but it started it. It isn't the beginning of it. Injustice was the beginning of it, but the network enabled it. So empowerment is the most powerful of all of these. So with that, this transition from the feudal times of the agrarian age to the empowerment at the time with the printing press to now the network, leadership, how do we do that? I think, so it's a proposition, and you tell me. But I think at the center of it, it would be guided by these principles of openness because one, they're real, they're there, they're not going to go away. So you have to embrace them and act upon them. And then I think they're built upon other things. I think they start with responsibility. And that responsibility is both a personal responsibility to act. You've all done that. I mean, that's why you're here. It's because you have this sense of personal responsibility. There's a responsibility that Jerry was talking about in terms of, hey, create an enterprise that has as its foremost thing doing good and make money along the way you're doing it. I think if you think about everyone today, Guy, who understands what the science of economics is about, is betterment of people, right? And he feels so strongly about that, he got on a plane here to tell us about it. So being responsible, taking action. And then followed by solitude and engagement. Gilbert talked about that in his organization. The whole chemistry he has of engaging people and freeing up ideas, allowing people to have that kind of solitude. I mean, what do you think the guy was doing when he was playing his cello? Yeah, he was very much in himself, right? And that's where you get those kind of things. And at the point of the spear is openness in terms of creating all of that within the context of those 4 principles of openness. So what I'd like to do is close with another brief clip, and it's Don himself talking about what he sees as a visual metaphor for this. And as a background, it's a view of the mermation, I love that term, mermation of starlings in England. And there's an area, starling's a small little bird, and there's an area in England where every night they go out and they go through these formations and these incredible dances. And no one has really understood what it's about or why it is. But in it, there's this leadership that occurs without any assigned leaders. And he talks about this and puts it into a context. And by the way, that mermation reminded me this morning of the coffee shop out here. When we were milling around, I mean, all the kind of energy that was out there. No clear leadership, but just rampant with leadership. So let's play this.
It's an age of empowerment and of freedom. Now, what I'd like to do is, to close, to share with you some research that I've been doing. tried to study all kinds of organizations to understand what the future might look like. But I've been studying nature recently. You know, bees come in swarms and fish come in schools. Starlings in the area around Edinburgh, in the moors of England, come in something called a murmuration. And the murmuration refers to the murmuring of the wings of the birds. And throughout the day, the starlings are out over a 20-mile radius, sort of doing their starling thing. And at night, they come together and they create one of the most spectacular things in all of nature. And it's called a murmuration. And scientists that have studied this have said they'd never seen an accident. Now, this thing has a function. It protects the birds. You can see on the right here, there's a predator being chased away by the collective power of the birds. And apparently this is a frightening thing if you're a predator of starlings. And there's leadership, but there's no one leader. Now, is this some kind of fanciful analogy, or could we actually learn something from this? Well, the murmuration functions to accord a number of principles, and they're basically the principles that I've described to you today. This is a huge collaboration. It's an openness. There's a sharing of all kinds of information, not just about location and trajectory and danger and so on, but about food sources. And there's a real sense of interdependence. The individual birds somehow understand that their interests are in the interests of the collective. Perhaps like we should understand that the business can't succeed in a world that's failing. Well, I look at this thing and I get a lot of hope. Think about the kids today in the Arab Spring, and you see something like this that's underway. And imagine, just consider this idea, if you would. What if we could connect ourselves in this world through a vast network of air and glass? Could we go beyond just sharing information and knowledge? Could we start to share our intelligence? Could we create some kind of collective intelligence that goes beyond an individual or a group or a team to create perhaps some kind of consciousness on a global basis? Well, if we could do this, we could attack some big problems in the world. And I look at this thing and I don't know, I get a lot of hope that maybe this smaller, networked, open world that our kids inherit might be a better one. And that this new age of networked intelligence could be an age of promise fulfilled and of peril unrequited. Let's do this. Thank you.
I think it's a wonderful piece. And, you know, it occurred to me when I was watching this and putting this together, and it was reemphasized today, is that there's another common characteristic of leadership which we saw today, which is optimism. And everyone that spoke to you today started with optimism and a sense of the ability of, you know, all of us to rise above it. So let's do it, as he says. Thank you.